Prologue. In my first semester of graduate school, the professor conducted individual introductory interviews with all the students in my cohort. This interview was to prepare us for our routine oral exams. After welcoming me to the program and asking about my hopes and aspirations for the future as a behavior analyst, my professor ended our introductory meeting with a seemingly simple question. John, since the start of the semester, we've discussed some common assumptions of science. What do you think about determinism? Do you buy into the idea that everything is determined? Sure, I believe there was orderliness in the world. After all, observing patterns in nature leads to our discovering our laws. These predictable patterns reveal the basic principles of science. But everything? You mean like this private conversation I'm having with myself? Do I think my thinking is determined? Nah, I said. Yes, to cause and effect. But if you're asking me if I believe I have no free choice in the world, then no, I can't agree to that. I disagreed with the professor on day one. Nice. Here we go. John versus science. Like the wonderful teacher and mentor he was, he did not put forth any resistance to my claim. He simply smiled, nodded his head, and said, "I'm thrilled that you're here in the program. Welcome." 2 years later, and after much procrastination, but now suited with the knowledge and skills to go forth and save the world, this is a pledge often spoken of in my field. I've never ceased to disagree with it. I found myself once again in the chair opposite of my Zen-like professor. And again he asked, "What do you think about this whole determinism thing?" This time around it was simple. I think I can get behind it. Although there were many fine details to work out, I could no longer hold an opposition to the notion that determinism is a natural principle in the world, and human behavior is no exception. Again, he smiled and offered blessings upon my future endeavors. I often reflect on why he chose determinism. Why not parsimony or empiricism? Why not molecular versus molar behavior? There are hundreds of concepts in the field of behavior science. Why this one? The best answer I can come up with is that our holding to the idea that we control our behavior prevents us from learning to accurately predict and control our behavior. In other words, holding to this notion prevents us from changing our behavior. In other words, humans keep on doing lousy shit to themselves and the world. Question: what's the difference between mechanics and behavior experts? Answer: no one pretends to be a mechanic because we're all too busy being experts on behavior. Multiply this self-behavior expert delusion syndrome times 7 billion, and we've arrived at our current problem in the world. The problem that leads to all other problems. As my wise professor demonstrates with each new cohort of students, the solution to this problem is solved by subtracting from the equation one self-proclaimed behavior expert at a time. If we could only buy into this one assumption, human behavior, like every other aspect of nature, is lawful and orderly. Oh, the places we could go. Depending on who we bet on in the ultimate matchup, self-will versus determinism, will affect how we understand and approach what we will refer to as behavior chains. If we hold to the notion of our autonomy, then we are unlikely to observe our actions as they occur in chains, nor will we utilize the principles of science to correct our wayward patterns of behavior. Here's a real-world example that occurs across the globe with each passing of the sun: the tradition of New Year's resolutions. The most prevalent of these goals are related to our physical bodies, and keep in mind, the changes that we hope will occur with our bodies will be brought about by our behavior. Some of these behaviors include exercise to feel better, eat healthier to lose weight, and stop smoking to not die. We can all testify to the fact that our annual resolutions are rarely kept. If we could start or stop our behavior at will, then these aspirations should be reasonably easy to achieve. We are not making yearly goals to summit Everest, sail around the world, or completely understand quantum entanglement theory. These ambitions would require more than merely behaving differently. We would need other stuff, such as expensive gear, money for travel, or someone to teach us advanced physics. But these are not the resolutions we set for ourselves. Instead, come January 1st, we share with our closest friends and family, or every human publicly on our social media platforms, that we want our body to weigh less in 364 days than it does today. On paper, at least, this should be easy. 101. I need to eat less today than I did yesterday. Or, I will exercise more minutes today than I did yesterday. Or, if I'm feeling ambitious, I will do both. And by maintaining this pattern for 364 days, well then, resolution met. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Changing behavior is much more complicated. I know, because changing an aspect of some person's behavior is what I do regularly. Behavior is complex. We must account for so many variables: our learning history, what is available to us, the effort required of us, etc. My resolution to weigh less at the end of the year would be simple if my will were the only necessary variable to my eating and exercise behavior. But it's not. This is good and bad news. The good news is we can stop with the self-hating and the stress and anxiety that comes from our inability to change our behavior when we rely solely on our will. Yep, we can let go of that too. Okay, now for the bad news, which is good news depending on how you look at it. We need to learn how behavior is maintained. We must come to understand with more clarity behavior in general and our behavior specifically. An ancient religious man once said, "Why do I do the things I do not want to do and cannot seem to do the things I want to do?" No one knew about behavior chains back then. That's why. We should learn to observe and study the variables that control our behavior. Then we can shift our time and effort to addressing these variables and allow our actions to follow naturally. Stop whipping the cart. We will not put forth effort into understanding behavior this way if we still hold to the notion that we can choose to behave however we want, whenever we want. If you are, right now, weighing the notions of self-will versus determinism, I would like to offer the same response my professor gave me. Welcome. I am thrilled that you are here with me. This book is not 2 years worth of scientific inquiry covering the ins and outs of human behavior, thankfully, for both our sakes. Instead, this book is more of a journey I will be taking and dragging you along with me, attempting to apply some principles of behavior science to improve my life. I will screw up much of the time, and hopefully, these screw-ups will be much more funny than sad. But either way, if this book made it into your hands, then I can say with certainty that some level of success has been achieved. If you stay with me through a few heady, sciencey principles, practice recalling and observing the things you do, and have a little fun playing around with the stuff in your life, then who knows, your future self might thank you for taking this journey with me. Up ahead, understanding behavior as a series of chains occurring in our day-to-day. Ways to build the change you want. Ways to break the chains you don't want. Some of my successes, more of my shortcomings.